Good morning, everybody. I am Michele Blake from the Ministry of Social Development, Counseling Department, and I'm here to represent the mental health fraternity. We in the mental health think that this is an excellent opportunity for us to be able to talk about some of the things that we're concerned about and that we want to make sure that people have a sense of. So once this started, we felt that it was an important thing to do to be able to start giving information almost immediately because we recognized that whether people realized it or not, there were going to be some impacts on them individually, on them as families, and on their communities. So one of the things we started to do almost immediately was give information. We still continue to give information because we recognize that everybody may not be able to source an individual contact at every time. So we give information. So we begin giving information through PSAs, through articles, through different sources, through our Facebook page and so forth. And people have been using that. Now, we in mental health want to do a couple of things. And I'm going to do a couple of things this morning in terms of just creating a context. And hopefully as we go along in the program, we'll have questions and perhaps discussions that could explain some of these things some more. So I want to give a context. And the context I want to start off by is saying that this is something that is affecting all of us from a mental health perspective. All of us. What do I mean by that? There are some people who may not have been directly impacted by the COVID-19 response and by the COVID-19 pandemic, sorry. There are some people whose security, food security, financial security, they have a place to live that is safe and comfortable, so their sense of security has not been impacted directly. You have some people for whom this has just totally upended their sense of security. Their homes are not safe. Their financial situation is in chaos. And so we're talking about people on both ends of the spectrum, those for whom the impact is perhaps minimal and for those for whom the impact is more maximized. The thing is, all of us, even those of us who may not appear to have any sort of direct impact on this, all of us are being impacted by this because we are living in a community and in a society. So we see what is happening to others around us. We feel distress when we see families that are in a difficult situation. We see what's happening in the world. We contemplate what this is going to mean for our, the Prime Minister just talked about our new norm. We contemplate what this means for our new norm. We don't know how it looks. The last time we had a situation like this was in 1918 with the Spanish flu, so we don't have anything to compare it to. We don't know how it looks. So even for those people for whom it may not seem as if they're directly impacted by this, we are all experiencing some angst about what is to come next, and that has an impact on a person's mental health. So in terms of the continuum, I wanted to start by normalizing the fact that all of us are going to have reactions. I want to normalize meaning that this is not a situation where we need to be talking about those people who are affected versus those who aren't. I want to normalize it, meaning that all of us have an impact. There are some benefits that come from normalizing. So when we normalize behavior, it means that, as I said, that all of us are in this together. And all of us are in this together means our language changes. Sometimes I hear people talking about being able to deal with this because they may be stronger and somebody may not be able to deal with it because they're weaker. And so those are kinds of language that we want to be able to ask people to remove from their vocabulary, because this is not about strength and weakness. This is about people coping with this situation at different levels. When we normalize something and when we pay attention to it, it means that we pay attention to the overt and obvious things, and we also pay attention to the subtle things. So there are going to be some subtle things that we have to pay attention to as we all deal with this mental health crisis. We're going to have to pay attention to subtle shifts in our family dynamics. We're going to have to pay attention to subtle shifts in how the family functions. What used to work before may not work now in this situation because of financial changes, living situations, whatever it is. And so we're going to have to pay attention to the fact that those shifts often cause stress and distress in families. And so when there's stress and distress in families, those manifest themselves in different ways, behaviorally, emotionally, psychologically. And again, we'll talk about some of those as we go through. Now, there are a couple of things that we look at as normal in this situation, that we are seeing as normal in this situation. We see normal sadness and depression. We see normal anxiety. We see normal increased stress. And we see normal people are grieving losses that they've had. Now, in order to be able to deal with some of these things, I was indicating in another forum that typically people have some ways to be able to deal with some of the things that they're faced with. So when we have anything that stresses us or frustrates us or challenges us, typically we find some way to be able to manage through those things, through either our internal coping skills, mechanisms, or external. So we are in a situation now where our stress levels and our stressors have dramatically increased. Everything has changed for everybody, physically, emotionally, psychologically, financially, everything has changed for people. And so the coping mechanisms that we typically use to deal with getting through situations, we have to dig even deeper to be able to manage some things. And we'll talk about some of the ways to cope as we go through. So we're seeing sadness and depression and a natural response to grieving loss. People have lost lots of things. There are tangible things that they've lost. There are intangible things that they've lost. And so there are normal reactions to the fact that things that you anticipated and prepared for and worked hard for, all of a sudden, they're just outside of your reach. We're having some normal anxiety reactions. Now, earlier, the Prime Minister, I think, talked about the fact that, I think you were talking about the fact that, again, going back to the new norm, all of a sudden, the things that we prepared for and anticipated and were able to control, those are no longer within our grasp. And so anxiety typically comes from the inability to be able to control and predict how your future, how your day, how your space looks. When that is taken away from you, there is nothing to sort of ground you. So anxiety is a normal reaction that people are having. And anxiety could look very clear and obvious, or it could be very subtle signs. Your stomach just feels unsettled. You just have that sense of doom. You just have that sense of panic. So there are some things that are going on. We need to pay attention to the fact that there are certain populations that we have to be prepared to deal with specifically because they're more vulnerable. I am very concerned about children especially because children display stress and anxiety and sadness in ways that don't typically reflect that. So they may have behaviors that have changed all of a sudden significantly. They may have behaviors that seem disruptive. They may have things going on with them that seem off. And so we have to pay attention to the fact that children are responding to this just like adults are. Children very much need structure and routine. And structure and routine are the things that keep them focused and keep their anxiety levels stressed. And so in a child's day, structure and routine is there. They get up, there's preparation, there's going to school, there are things that happen in school, there's what the end of school day looks like, there's what the end of the day looks like in terms of homework and perhaps bed and so forth. So there's a structure. All of a sudden, this is not available to children. And I'm not sure how much of it they understand, and I'm not sure how much of it is explained to them, but they're certainly in a situation where their own levels of anxiety and stress and sadness are going to be there. So we have to pay attention to certain populations. I talk about the family again. We have to pay attention to the fact that families are distressed financially, emotionally, and so there is going to be an impact on how children are dealt with in families. So at the end of the day, we're going to have to cope. We are going to have to cope for we don't know how long. And so it means then that we're going to have to reframe how we look at this and how we look at our control in this situation. So there are positive ways that we can cope, and there are ways that we want to stay away from when we talk about coping. And again, as we go through the discussion, we'll get into some of those. But just in terms of pointing out a few things, just in terms of coping, having a sense of gratitude, helping others, acceptance, reframing. Just let me explain a couple of these just before I go into some more. Helping others, paying attention to other people, helps to shift the focus from what is going on internally. Now, if you are in a situation where you're focused on your challenges and on your grief and on your loss, you just have that internal dialogue with yourself that just continues to ruminate. It's just that. When you shift your focus outside of that and shift it to another arena, shift it to giving something to somebody else or doing something for somebody else, you'd be surprised at what that does in being able to sort of interfere with that cycle of victim, being the victim and feeling sorry for yourself. So that is a healthy way to cope. Gratitude, being able to move your focus outside of the things that you've lost and the things that aren't working to the things that are working. And it takes a little bit more effort to be able to look at what good things could possibly come out of this. But it means then that you're pushing yourself to a point of being able to have a different experience. And basically that is what we want to do in this situation. Reframing simply is the ability to take a picture and look at it in a different way. We're not saying to change the picture. We're not able to change financial realities right now for many people. We're not able to change what is going on in the world. We're not able to change the fact that COVID is here. But reframing is something that we have power over. We have the ability to take a situation and look at it from a particular way, which then helps to shift our internal dialogue and our mood. So, again, as we go through, we'll talk about some of those. We have to make sure that in this situation where there is so much going on and there's so much of our coping and managing depends on our ability to dig deep and be able to, find things to be able to help us through. It is important for us to remember that we ought not to make too many big changes in times like these, because we are already having to use all of our resources to be able to manage, to be able to get through, to be able to adopt and adjust to our new norm. So it is not a good thing to have to make big changes in your life at this stage. It's important for us when we're talking about coping to use things like structure in our day, use humor, be intentional with how we care for ourselves. We want to make sure that people don't overdo. We want to make sure that people don't use too much alcohol to be able to sort of deal with things. We want to make sure that people don't use unhealthy mechanisms to soothe themselves or get into compulsive or risk-taking behavior. So again, these are some of the things that we want to talk about as we go through. But in terms of just creating a context, I wanted to be able to bring that to the panel. Thank you.